Top 10 Best Cake Flavors to Satisfy Your Sweet Tooth. Cakes can be categorized in many different ways, but most experienced bakers use the ingredients and the process of mixing to do so. There are many different kinds of cakes, and there are also many different ways to divide them up into different categories. Home bakers tend to classify cakes according to their flavoring, such as chocolate cakes, fruit cakes, and so on. This is helpful when you're trying to determine what to eat, but it's not as helpful when you're trying to comprehend how to prepare a cake most effectively. You will notice that the finished product has a different texture and color, depending on whether it is a yellow or white cake, depending on how the batter was prepared. This video presents a list of the fundamental categories of cakes that, while extensive, covers most of the bases. Number 10. Butter cake. A butter cake can be made using any cake recipe as long as it starts with cream butter and sugar. After the butter and sugar have been creamed together, eggs are added to the mixture to give it a bit more air. Flour, and sometimes another liquid such as milk, is added to give the batter structure and texture, and baking powder or baking soda is added to ensure that it rises in the oven. Several variations of cake batter belong to the butter cake family, including chocolate, white, yellow, and marble. The color of the white and yellow cakes typically depends on whether the cakes are made with whole eggs, extra egg yolks, yellow cake, or just egg whites. Marble cakes are typically made with a combination of white and yellow cake batter, white cake. Number 9. The pound cake. The pound cake and the butter cake are both related to each other. A pound of butter, a pound of sugar, a pound of eggs, and a pound of flour are the four components that make up a pound, which is why the term pound is used to refer to this quantity. In some recipes for pound cake, the eggs are separated, and the egg whites are beaten before being incorporated into the batter to leaven the cake. In other recipes, learners such as baking soda and baking powder are used, and the batter is thoroughly folded into the butter cake. These cakes often have a very subtle flavor, and they are served either plain or with a straightforward glaze or water icing on top. Baking a pound cake often involves using either a loaf or bundt pan. There are many other iterations of pound cake, including coffee cakes, sour cream cakes, and fruit crumb cakes. Number 8. Sponge cake. Is there a recipe that calls for a lot of beaten eggs or beaten egg whites but doesn't use any baking soda or baking powder? This is a sort of cake known as a sponge cake, and there are many variations of sponge cakes, each of which may be referred to by a different name depending on where you are. Number 7. Genoise cake. In Italy and France, a sponge cake is known as genoise. In genoise, whole eggs are beaten with sugar until they are thick and ribbony, and then flour, and sometimes butter, is added and the batter is baked. The result is wonderful baked in a round cake pan and simply frosted, but genoise is also pliable enough to be baked in a jelly, roll pan and rolled up into a roulade. Genoise can be made by beating whole. Genoise cake layers are always moistened with flavored syrup. Additionally, genoise cake layers are frequently sliced into thin horizontal layers and piled with rich fillings such as buttercream. Both of these techniques are used to give taste and moisture to the layers. To differentiate them from butter layer cakes made in the American manner, which often have fewer layers but are of a thicker consistency, these cakes with multiple layers are referred to as European style. You can get them in coffee houses all around Europe. Number 6. Biscuit cake. Another type of sponge cake. Biscuit cakes, always pronounced the French way as bis, cuits, contain both egg whites and yolks, but in contrast to genoise, the egg whites and yolks are whipped separately before being folded back together. Biscuit cakes are always pronounced the French way as bis, cuits. This results in a fluffy batter that is drier than a genoise yet maintains its shape after being mixed more successfully. As a result of this, it is frequently utilized for the creation of piped shapes such as ladyfingers. If baked in a tube pan like an angel food cake, it results in an extremely chewy sponge cake that was popular in the early 20th century but has since fallen out of favor. If baked in a square pan, however, it results in a cake that is more like a traditional sponge cake. However, it is still known in a slightly altered form as the traditional Passover sponge cake. In this version, matzah cake meal and potato starch are substituted for flour in place of the traditional sponge cake. Number 5. Angel food cake. There are no egg yolks in angel food cakes because only egg whites are used in their preparation. After the whites have been beaten with sugar until they are very firm, the flour is gently incorporated into the mixture. This results in a cake that is snow white in color, airy, and delicate, and it pairs wonderfully with fruit. The majority of angel food cakes have a spongy and chewy character that can be attributed to the relatively high amount of sugar that they contain as well as the absence of egg yolks in the recipe. Angel food cakes are baked in 2-piece tube pans that have not been greased. After baking, the cakes are inverted to cool since they would fall apart if they were cooled with the right side up in the pan or if they were removed from the pan while they were still warm. Because there is no butter in this recipe, there is no fat in the cake. Number 4. A chiffon cake. This relatively recent product was developed in the United States by a salesperson who later sold the recipe to General Mills. During the 1940s and 1950s, General Mills disseminated the recipe through various marketing materials. A traditional chiffon cake is similar to both an oil cake and a sponge cake in texture and appearance. Baking powder and vegetable oil are both components of this mixture, but the eggs are separated, and the egg whites are beaten until they form soft peaks, before being mixed into the batter. Chiffon cakes, similar to angel food cakes, can be cooked in tube pans and then layered with fillings and frostings after baking. Number 3. Prepare a cake made without flour. Cheesecakes baked in the oven and chocolate cakes made without flour are examples of these. The use of a springform pan ensures that the finished product may be easily removed from the container. However, certain variations can also be baked in standard round, layer cake pans. It is common practice to place the filled pan inside of a larger pan that is only half filled with water to protect the tender and silky cake from the intense heat at the bottom of the oven, which could cause the cooked cake to have a more porous texture rather than a silky one. This method of baking is referred to as baking the cake in a water bath. Number 2. A flourless cake that has not been baked. After being formed in a dessert ring or springform pan, these kinds of cakes are normally cooled for a short period before being removed from the mold. They consist of cheesecakes and mousse cakes that are not baked. They frequently consist of a crust or bottom layer that is cooked before the addition of the mousse. Alternating layers of mousse and additional ingredients, such as genoise or biscuit, is a common practice. Number 1. Carrot cake. Leavening techniques similar to those used in butter cakes are utilized in the preparation of carrot cake. However, rather than butter, a neutral oil such as vegetable or canola oil is used. Because of this, it will keep a little longer than butter cakes, but the result might occasionally be on the greasier side than it should be. The procedure is essentially the same. Only, instead of beginning by creaming butter and sugar together, you begin by mixing eggs and sugar, and then you add oil. We appreciate your viewing, and we hope you enjoyed the video. How was the video? Did you enjoy it? Post your feedback in our comments section below and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more updates.